Hello, everyone, and welcome to Political Frenemies. I think we're now on week 4. So this is the podcast where a Conservative and a Liberal Democrat debate the week's news. And we do so quite robustly, but we still remain friends. How's about that? That's how political discourse should be. So on the centre left is me, Mathew Hulbert. I'm a Lib Dem activist and a former Lib Dem councillor. And on the right, it's the man himself. It's Dr. Chris Newton, who is a former Tory defence advisor and also an academic. Hello, Chris.
Hello, Matthew. I hear you. We're recording, by the way, on the Saturday evening. I've heard that you've had quite the day today.
I absolutely have. In many respects, it's been a very good day. I did a little bit on Talk TV this morning as we're recording this. So I was on Peter Cardwell's panel, and he gave a shout out to us on this podcast. So let's give a shout out to him. Peter's a great guy. So thanks very much to Peter. Really enjoyed that. And then I whizzed across town to go to a Compass event. I don't know how many folks know about Compass, but it's been around for a long time, and it's kind of a centre-left think tank. Used to just be a Labour thing, but then they broadened it out, so it includes Lib Dems and Greens and others now. So spent a lovely afternoon there. Heard from people such as Claire Short, former International Development Secretary. Not easy to say that, amongst others, which was really good. And then went to catch the train and was really looking forward to a nice train ride and, you know, getting a seat and all of that. Well, could I get a seat? No, of course I couldn't get a seat. So I had to stand for the hour from London Euston to Nuneaton. So I was not best pleased about that. But now I'm back home in my little flat here. I've had a bite to eat, a sip to drink, and of course it's always lovely to see you, Chris. So I'm totally fine now. I'm totally zen now. It's fine.
It's great to see you as well, and it's good to see that you had a good day, and it's good to see that you had a great outing this morning with Peter Cardwell, and it's a little bit of a warm-up act for what we're going to do now, isn't it? You've had a little bit of a.
It is indeed, but I was so chuffed that. Yeah, I was so chuffed that he gave our podcast a mention. I hadn't asked him to actually, but he did. So Peter's a really good guy, and you know, we a bit like this podcast. Me and Peter don't always agree. Quite often we don't, on air and off. But yeah, absolutely, always remain friends. And really, that should be. I mean, that is just being grown up, isn't it, Chris? Really.
Yeah, and as we've said from right at the beginning, this is the way it should be. Disagree robustly, but always remain friends. There's more to life, even though that this is a politics podcast. There is more to life than politics, and we all share interests other than politics, and we shouldn't let politics get in the way of friendships.
Absolutely. So let's tell our audience what we're going to be talking about this week. So we're going to be talking about the assisted dying vote. Obviously, we covered this extensively last week, so we probably won't go as long. We definitely won't go as long on it this week. But obviously, the vote has now happened, so we can talk about what has happened and what that means. So we'll be talking about that. We'll be talking about something very interesting and slightly odd, I have to say, from my perspective this week, which was Louise Haigh's resignation and all of the issues around that and what it means for the government. The new UK immigration statistics, gosh, that's been a big one this week. That certainly is a hot potato. And taking place right as we speak, is the counting for the Irish election. So yesterday was their general election day, but they use a PR system, and it takes quite a PR system. Yeah, I've got to cheer that. But it takes quite a time to count. So they're currently doing that, and I think they're way down into the counting, the kind of the first round of that PR election. So we can talk about some of the results about that too. And then I think you want to mention just a little bit on the very serious situation in Syria at the end of the programme, Chris.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Okay, let's go. So, yes, we're going to start our podcast today with the assisted dying vote. Obviously, it went through, and I have to say, it went through with a slightly bigger majority than I was expecting. I was expecting it to be a bit closer than it was. I mean, obviously, Chris, we need to understand the how the parliamentary process works here. This was a second reading vote. In a sense, this was an in principle vote, wasn't it? And now it goes on to committee to be considered line by a smaller group of MPs, and then ultimately we'll have to go to the House of Lords, I believe, and there's a third reading, and it's really at third reading where the decision is about whether it's going to become law or not. So I mean, even though it was passed yesterday, and as a supporter, I was obviously pleased about that. The fact is, it could still be the case, perhaps less likely now, but it could still be the case, Chris, that it doesn't become law in the end.
Yeah, it's important to understand that it hasn't. It's not law at the moment. It hasn't gone through the final stages, and it has to go through all of these stages. So it's important for those not familiar with our system that it has to go through committee stage and the House of Lords, as you say, and back to the Commons and so forth. And I believe that, as I said last week, that there will be changes. There might even be significant changes to the bill, but I do think in the end that, given that the second reading received quite a very big majority, about 55, that it will go through in the end. But there, I suspect there are, through the debate yesterday, there are concerns. There are especially concerns over safeguarding and so forth. And I really do hope, as someone who was, as soon as the vote happened, I voiced my opposition last week, but I do kind of voice a slight, are we actually, is this the right road to go down? I mean, have we really grasped the enormous gravity of this decision and the potential changes to how we view death and making these decisions, these very difficult decisions?
Yeah, I mean, what did you make of the debate, Chris? I mean, again, from whatever stance you take, I thought it was, and sometimes we hear this, and it's a little bit of a cliche, but I think this time it was truthful that this was Parliament at its best. I mean, there were some seriously good speeches.
Yeah, and there were good speeches on both sides. Obviously, this is going to be a very emotional topic, and there were some very emotional speeches, and MPs managed to bring their own kind of examples and their own case studies into this, and those were extremely moving. There were one or two instances where I thought it wasn't in the spirit of that. There was one occasion where I think a Labour MP told Danny Kruger to watch his language with regards to his use of the word suicide, and actually what he was saying is that the Suicide Act needs to be amended. I don't like it when MPs kind of try and police other people's language like that. People should be free to express, but overall, obviously, this is a very emotional debate, and
did you think
it was very moving?
Did you think, Chris, that I certainly personally felt that Robert Jenrick didn't really live up to what the day was with some of his comments?
Well, I mean, people are going to have very strong views, and as I said, he's entitled to his views. He's entitled to express himself how he wants, as everybody else has. I just hope that those people. The one thing I would say is that those people on the winning side of this debate, I really hope that they treat this, with the gravity and the soberness which this deserves. I think there was an element of triumphantism in the aftermath of that. I think there was among sort of certain campaigners and commentators. Let's say let's treat this. People have very people have legitimate concerns here, and they're real concerns. And I do think that there is a real danger of a slippery slope here. There is a real danger of, over time, the remit being expanded. I am concerned that in 10 years' time we could be talking about a scan, if the podcast is still going, in 10 years' time, whether we could be talking about a big scandal here. So we really do have to get this right. What's your reaction to the bill, and
Well,
do you have any concerns about the substance of the bill?
Well, just on that, and we did a lot on this last week, and I don't think we kind of need to go over our our points of view too much here again here. I'm in principle in supportive of this bill. Do I think it would have been better if it had a bit more time yesterday to debate? Yes, I do, but I guess it's in the nature of private members' bills that they only have the time that was allotted. I really hope that the committee stage does its job properly, as I'm sure it will, in going through line by line and really looking at the granular detail of this, because obviously in this bill, unlike perhaps any other of recent times, the details really do matter. I mean, I think it's the point that Layla Moran, Lib Dem MP, of course, but also chair of the Health and Care Select Committee, made when she said that some seem to be treating this as if this one vote was kind of the end of the matter. It obviously isn't, as I was saying in the introduction here, and it could still. I mean, I agree with you that I think it will now become law, but ultimately, if enough MPs decide that the details still aren't there for them, then in theory it could be stopped at third reading. So there's quite a way to go here. I mean, you talk about the triumphalism of some, but I actually thought in the Commons, when the result was announced, I was listening on the radio actually when it was announced, and you could hear a pin drop. I mean there was no sense of any cheering at all, or indeed any kind of booing, I guess, from those that hadn't won the day.
That's
And
true.
I think
I was mainly talking about kind of from the outside, from activists and so forth. I don't know. I don't think that was the intention, but I do think they need to be wary of how it comes across, with regards to that, because the feelings are high on this. So sorry. Yeah.
No, they absolutely are. They absolutely are, Chris. I don't know about the slippery slope argument. I mean, ultimately, as again, I heard one MP say this week, I think actually it might have been Kit Malthouse, who has been kind of the leading Tory supporter of advocating for this bill, when he said that, look, ultimately, yeah, this Parliament can't bind future parliaments, but it would have to be a decision by a future Parliament if this was to be extended. And I can't necessarily see a future Parliament doing that. I mean, I think social attitudes would have to change quite a bit for this to be expanded out. But I have to say, Chris, I've heard some very emotional and very genuinely heartrending people calling into certainly the BBC and other broadcasters this week, talking about why they actually feel it should be expanded, and that at the moment it doesn't include them, and that they feel that what they're going through, or what they could be going through when they're a bit older, that they will still fall outside the scope of this. So there's lots of arguments, both for and against, and also within that as well. Now, I'm not in favour of it being expanded, but equally there are those who say it should. So none of this is easy, Chris.
No, I mean, this is a really difficult debate. As I say, I hearing the debates, hearing sort of people's experiences with end of life care and so forth, it's very difficult to listen to, especially to listen to people's end of life or relatives experience, or their relatives end of life experiences, and as I said, this must be treated with the utmost kind of respect, care, and we must respect the other point of view, because as I said at the outset of this, I do understand the moral case for both sides, and I do understand those who say we shouldn't prolong suffering, but at the end of the day, we've got to make a judgment as to whether there are wider sort of unintended consequences or not. And I understand that people will take a different opinion to me on that.
I'm pleased to hear you say that there is a moral case on both sides, because again, I've heard, it may just be in my hearing because I'm super sensitive on this subject, I have to admit, but I've thought that some who oppose the bill have appeared to suggest that the kind of the moral case, the, dare I say it, the religious case is on their side. And I don't like things, you'd never find me saying that, you know, God supports or doesn't support any particular political cause. I don't think that is really helpful at all to do that.
At the same time, do you think that on the other side there were people, high profile people, who were saying that people shouldn't bring their religion into politics and into decisions like these, and so it goes both ways, doesn't it?
It does, and I don't necessarily agree with that either. I mean, but equally, I think that, and I felt this with, I mean, I won't name them, but I felt this with some in my own party who appear to have, I certainly think, appear to have suggested that the moral case is with them in opposing the bill, and I just don't like that kind of talk. I think there are, as you say, kind of moral rights and perhaps wrongs on both sides of this, and it's not helpful, I don't think, to speak of them in that term. So I think what we need to do now, and obviously this will now hopefully happen, is get into the real nitty-gritty of this and making sure that those safeguards are absolutely there. And I'll say now that if it's felt, and you know, I shall look at the detail myself as it moves on, and even I'm prepared to say, as someone who is a big supporter of it, that if it's felt that, if I feel that the safeguards aren't there to protect people, then I won't necessarily support it. I mean, I don't think any of us should be on something like this. And again, Leyla Moran has said this. She reserves the right to vote against it. She said at third reading if the detail isn't there. And so I don't think any of us should be dogmatic about an issue like this. I don't think that is really helpful. But do I, in principle, support assisted dying? Well, yeah, as I talked about last week, I do, and I absolutely respect, Chris, that you take a different view on this. I
should also say that I have found this issue very difficult to form a position on, because I've listened very closely to both sides, and I'm open to, as I said last week, I'm open to all the arguments. At the moment, I'm not persuaded to change my mind, but as I said, I do understand the moral case for the other side. But I maintain my view that I am concerned that there are unintended consequences here.
I think that's probably all we can say on that one, Chris. But obviously, we'll keep a watching brief on that. I did hear today on the radio that even if this all goes through, it won't be for several years that the first assisted dying, assisted deaths, whatever you want to call it, will actually be taking place. So we'll be coming back to this at a future podcast. Now let's turn to what I think, for me at least, is one of the strangest political resignations that I've heard of in a long time, and that is the resignation over the past couple of days of Louise Haigh, the transport secretary, and more revelations have been coming out about this, haven't they, Chris? All to do with an alleged mugging, and mobile phones going missing and then reappearing again, and even more details tonight, I gather.
Yeah, so Basically, Louise Haigh, this was about 10, this was 10 years ago, 2013, 2014. She reported that she was mugged, and included in a handbag, I think it was her work mobile phone. She reported it to the police, and then it was, she says she discovered some time later that the mobile hadn't been taken. And when the mobile phone was switched on, and that's when it triggered the police's attention. And obviously the police, she was then interviewed by the police. She was told by her solicitor to not to go for no comment and to plead guilty, and she was convicted, although the conviction is now spent. And there are some additional allegations, and and again, this is reported, I think, by Sky News. They haven't been confirmed. The allegation centers around the photo that she sent to the police, and whether they were taken sort of after the mugging was alleged to have taken place. And so, but again, it has to be said that that part of the story hasn't been confirmed. It hasn't been denied, and we should be very clear on that. It's up to Haigh to clarify what went on there. But it is a very strange resignation, and since this emerged this week, and since then she resigned. And this does, I mean, that extra revelation does change the complexion of the story. Now, she said that she told Starmer about her conviction and her guilty plea at the time when she was appointed to the shadow cabinet. So she was appointed in relation to Starmer knowing. Now, Starmer claims, or the Labour spokespeople have claimed, that Louise resigned because of new information. Now, it could have been what Sky is reporting is that new information, but it's all very strange. And what do you think? What do you think this tells us about the government? Is this kind of an isolated incident, or is this reflective of kind of wider dysfunction within the Labour government and within the Labour Party, how they vet candidates? One thing I'd want to know is whether Louise Haigh actually revealed all of this at the time of her selection, and whether Labour were aware of that when she was selected to be MP. I'm not quite sure whether that's been revealed or not. But to me, this obviously this isn't good, and this compounds Labour's problems at a time where it has made an extremely, what I would say, appalling start to its first 5 months in government.
Well, just a couple of things on this. I believe there's also further allegations, and again, these are allegations about who may or may not have been called on this mobile phone. So there's allegations around that as well. So there's lots of moving parts to this, some which have been confirmed and some which absolutely haven't. And then there's kind of what this means politically. And the Times was reporting today, and we were discussing this on Peter Cardwell's show earlier on Talk, that it's alleged that Morgan McSweeney, so people may not have heard of this guy, he is now Keir Starmer's chief of staff, a very important figure in Downing Street, behind the scenes there, that he may have advised Haigh to resign. So I mean, I guess it's one of those questions, Chris, of she's resigned, but was she resigned? Do you know what I mean? What was it in effect a sacking that they say, well, we'll allow you to resign, so keep a bit of dignity in that sense. But Keir Starmer certainly, I mean, this is the first kind of controversy like this of his government, the first cabinet resignation. And I was quite taken, Chris, by how short, some might indeed say terse, his reply letter was to Haigh, which some people are saying, and I mean, time will tell, may mean that she doesn't come back to government, certainly whilst he is Prime Minister. We'll have to see about that. Who knows? But it does.
Yeah, that letter was absolutely brutal, wasn't it? It was
brutal.
Yeah.
Yeah, it absolutely was, and it seems to me, and again, I made this point on talk earlier that I think an example has been made of Louise Haigh by Keir Starmer that rightly or wrongly he's not going to take any nonsense, and his ministers best darn well behave. Now, some might say this is really
unless you're Rachel Reeves.
Well, I'm saying nothing. But what I will say is that, I think Haigh might feel that she's been a bit hard done to. I mean, this was quite as I say, more may come out on this, so who knows? But given what we know up to now, or at least what's been confirmed up to now, it does seem that she may have been a bit hard done to, because ultimately this was a long time ago. She allegedly did tell Keir Starmer when he appointed her to originally the shadow cabinet. And so it does feel that, gosh, there's been some stories reported that Number 10 has felt the heat, and Haigh has been resigned or has decided to resign herself. But the whole situation is not good. But maybe she has been made an example of, Chris. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, who knows? I mean, she has. I mean, there's been reports of tension between her and Starmer. I mean, she caused the government enormous problems with her remarks on P&O, just days before the investment summit, and she very nearly scuppered a big investment there. But
I'd argue she was right. I'd argue she was right in what she said. I mean, whether she should have said it or not is a different matter. But
you can see why she's in the she was already in Starmer's sort of bad books in relation to that. There may have been further tensions which you are not aware of, and yes, the brutal way in which she was dispatched politically. It does send a big message to the rest of the cabinet, but then again, there's a whole question of whether Rachel Reeves should resign.
Is this over the CV situation? Is this over the CV situation?
Yeah, obviously the two things are very different.
Right,
are very different, but I wouldn't say necessarily that he's always going to be quick to sack someone or to recommend that somebody resigns. Let's say, so we have to consider that. But one question I'd like to ask, and there are two questions actually. But the first question I'd like to ask is, are MPs entitled to a life before they become MPs, or at least cabinet ministers? Are they entitled to a life? Is this a bit ridiculous in terms of going over someone's past, like 10, 20, 20 years ago, and using that as a basis of as a resignation? Should the MPs be entitled to to have their career or record before that, or are these aspects, are these this is a criminal conviction after all, are these elements, these bits of the past, these skeletons in the closet, do they have implications for the minister in carrying out his or her duties, and therefore if something is discovered, then they should affect whether he or she stays in the cabinet whilst they're working in the cabinet? shadow cabinet.
Well, I mean, a point I made earlier, and I'll make again now, is, Boris Johnson continued as Prime Minister after being ticked off by the police for Partygate. And I mean, I guess there's views about whether he should or should have done or not, but the fact is he did. And it was, sometime after that he ended up having to fall on his sword. So, I mean, I agree that Boris Johnson might not be the best example to be following, but that's just what I've said there is just kind of the fact of the matter. I'm sorry to see Haigh go, in as much as I personally thought, and I know that you'll perhaps have different views, Chris, but I personally thought that she was a very good transport secretary. She was transport secretary that actually cared.
What did she do?
Sorry?
This is actually my second question. What one? People say, oh, she's a very good transport secretary. She was in there for 5 months, and I'm struggling to think of what apart from you might say, well, she stopped the strikes. Well, she gave the unions pretty much what they wanted. So
I think she was setting about. I think she was setting about. Nationalising the. I never know whether to say whether the trains or the railways, but you know what I mean. She was beginning that. She was also saying some quite interesting things on buses as well, which is someone who doesn't drive and who uses the buses an awful lot. And as my experience on the train tonight shows that something needs to be done about our trains and much of our transport infrastructure. So she was certainly saying some interesting things. I agree that you can't do a fat lot in just a few months, but she seemed to care about transport, and I'm not sure that's always been the case for transport secretaries. I do have to say though that her replacement, Heidi Alexander, is someone who we know as well cares about transport. Although I do know, as was pointed out to me earlier today, that she was responsible for ULEZ in London. I know that was unpopular with some, clearly unpopular with some drivers, but looked at from the perspective of we must do something about climate change and indeed about the dreadful smog, the dreadful air in London. Many people think that it was a good thing. So you pays your money and you take your choice on that one. But I think she could be a really good replacement for Louise Haigh as transport secretary. I mean, we'll see if there's more in the Sunday papers, Chris, because quite often with controversies like these, I think the people involved dread the Sunday papers. But will there be more detail? So we'll find out as we're recording this tomorrow about that.
I should say, as someone who lives in London, I haven't really noticed any change to the transport under Heidi Alexander. It's still pretty terrible in terms of public transport. So I have no kind of expectations with regards to her tenure as Secretary of State for Transport. But let's see.
So let's just ask one final question on this. I mean, should, not just talking about Louise Haigh here, but any minister, should someone resign for something they did a decade ago? And as you quite rightly say there, I mean, are we wanting people to be, absolutely pristine, to have really have had no life whatsoever, to have never have done anything wrong, to never have tweeted anything wrong, to never have any kind of legal issue, and they just appear robot-like, and there they are, they're a minister of the Crown, and they go about their duties perfectly and never say the wrong thing, and wonderful. Is that really what we want from our politics, or do we want some human beings who might have done stuff in their youth, but who have turned their lives around, and now they can use that experience to work better in government? I mean, I guess it depends on the seriousness of the crime. I totally, of course, understand that, but for something like this, as it appears at the moment, again, it seems that she's been dealt pretty harshly here, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, I do. I really. We've all engaged in it. We've all engaged in sort of Twitter archaeology or quote archaeology. We've all done it. We've all kind of pulled someone else's quotes from years ago to make a point. But at the risk of sounding rather hypocritical, I do think it is. I don't like it. I don't like it, especially if you're going back, further back. There was a case of Toby Young, who was, I think he was due to be head of the Office for Students. And they were, and the media were pulling like quotes from 10, 15 years ago, I think, to use against him, and ultimately he didn't take up that role, and that's why he went on to the Free Speech Union. So I do think that I've always been kind of old fashioned in the sense that politics should ultimately be based on policy and how good your
Right.
ideas, and I don't like this kind of digging people's words up. Now, my standard line would have been, of course, the exception to that is a criminal offence or something something like that, and of course the Haigh situation does fall into that category. But some might argue, well, that's still a bit harsh, if her version of events are true. So I think I'd still stick with that. Possibly, I suppose it depends on the offence, but in general, I don't like this digging up people's, and people change their mind as well. People can change their mind from 2 years ago as well, and people do change as people. So yeah, I think politics should focus more on people's ideas and not what people may have said like
Well,
15,
on that
20
note,
years ago.
yeah, absolutely. So our next topic here on the podcast is another big controversy this week, Chris, has been about the immigration stats. It was thought to be one thing, and has proven to be something quite different. This is the latest ONS figures, isn't it?
Yeah, and essentially what it shows is that the figures for 2023 were, in terms of net migration, were at 906,000. And there's actually been a decrease in net migration on 2024. So the 2024 figure is 728,000. Now the bit you refer to is the fact that the 2023 figure has been revised upwards a fair bit. So the expectations or the numbers for 2023 is higher than, which was high to begin with, is even higher now. And these figures, even the 2024 figures, now the Tories can say, oh, we're bringing or net migration down, but even the 2024 figures, in terms of the history of net migration and trends and so forth, it's still massively high in comparison to what has been in recent years. In recent years, the figures have tended to be in the 100 or 200,000. It's only very recently that the numbers have absolutely shot up even further. Before that, the numbers were even lower than that. So the big questions is kind of your reaction to the figures. Do you consider net migration to be too high? Are you relaxed about the level of net migration? And what did you make of, because there's been a big debate between Labour and Conservatives. There were Kemi Badenoch did a big speech on immigration. Keir Starmer responded through a press conference as well on immigration, and they were kind of beginning to set out what they were going to do on the immigration. So what's your reaction to all of that, and what's your opinion on the levels of immigration in the UK in general?
I mean, I must admit that I am, not just a liberal in as much as a liberal Democrat, a big L liberal, but I'm what you might call a small L liberal on immigration. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, I guess if people are proven that they shouldn't be here, then there has to be a system to remove people. I would hope it would be a humane system, but nonetheless a system. But my view is that immigration has absolutely been and is a benefit to our economy, not just a net economic benefit, but a net social and cultural benefit as well. And that absolutely remains my view, and I think broadly speaking, my party's view too. And certainly, and I know these are kind of two separate things, but I'll just make the point that my party absolutely believes that in terms of people seeking asylum, so people who are fleeing persecution or war or something similar, we absolutely believe that there should be more safe and legal routes for those people to make their way to the UK. And I know that I've done enough of these debates to know that folks on I'm not saying you, Chris, but folks on the right will then always come back to me and say, well, why did they have to come to the UK when they reach France first? But my answer to that is that I think we need to, as a country that believes in fairness, that's always been part of kind of the British psyche, that we need to take our good share of people who are genuinely seeking asylum. So that's my view on that. In terms of economic migrants, I mean, that is a different situation, I grant you, although I would say that there's nothing too wrong with wanting to look for a better life. Is just a broad point that I'd make on that. And we're lucky here in the UK that we don't live in a country that is since the Second World War, obviously, that has been ravaged by war, and people tend not to face I say too much persecution, because there is persecution of minorities in this country, but nowhere near perhaps as bad as in other places. And so, in a sense, we're quite privileged in this country, and we shouldn't forget that people in other countries face much more difficult situations, and it's not necessarily wrong per se to want to seek a better life for you and your family. That having been said, we do have to have
Sorry, yeah. No, so I should say that firstly, in terms of my position on this, is that firstly, I do accept from your point of view that that migrants, the immigrants, are acting rationally, and we shouldn't blame the immigrants themselves for wanting a better life or to taking up an opportunity. So I think that's important from my perspective in terms of my position. I think it's important for me, especially for the Liberals in the audience, for me to get that across first of all. Where I think the criticism should lie is in government policy. And I believe that government, and I'm talking about Labour, Conservatives, coalition, and so forth. They have handled mismanaged immigration. They have implemented a policy where the immigration has, especially since 2004, net migration has increased dramatically, and there hasn't been the corresponding. It hasn't been matched with corresponding resources and services and so forth. So the situation is that our population massively kind of exceeds the infrastructure that we have. That we have had, and it's very difficult at the rate of immigration that we're having at the moment for the infrastructure to catch up. Is absolutely impossible at the moment for the infrastructure to catch up. So my question is there a limit for you? Is there a point where you say it's too high and maybe we need to we need to not, I wouldn't argue let's stop immigration completely. I recognize the benefits that there are. If mismanaged, there are also downsides as well, but there are also benefits as well. But is there a point to you where it gets a bit too much and where it becomes difficult for government to manage effectively and for us to create a society where people have a good standard of living and where society is cohesive?
Well, of course we need the right infrastructure, but you're quite right to say that again. That's about government policy, isn't it? I mean, that's not the fact that there isn't the infrastructure isn't the fault of the migrant. You know, that is the fault of consecutive government government policies over the past, however many decades. And so again, when people use that as a criticism, I hope what they're criticising is the government and not the individuals who are looking for a better life.
The criticism, and part of the criticism is that again, in the 90s, the rate of net migration was in the tens of thousands. That's why the Tories promised that figure, but never delivered. They've been they were completely disappointing and completely failed on immigration. So I'm perfectly willing to accept that. But the problem that we face at the moment, if you have immigrations at the level, or net migration at the level of the hundreds of thousands, then it's impossible for us to build for us to build the infrastructure to catch up with all of that. And if you keep adding to the demand, you can never create the supply that meets that demand. So what we're saying is that it has to be lowered for the foreseeable future in order for the supply to catch up with the demand.
Well, I mean, what I would say is that we need a robust but also humane immigration system. And a point that, and this isn't original from me. I heard one of my party's MPs, Tim Farron, say it on. I think he said it several times on Question Time when he's appeared when this issue comes up. That he was talking specifically about the last government and the whole Rwanda scheme and all of that. He said that if the money, all of the money that went on that farce, which I would absolutely say that it was, given that the only people who ever went there were, I think, 4 volunteers. Had been spent really on a
chance, was it? But anyway, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So if the money that had been spent on that had been spent on recruiting, more people to deal with this backlog, then we may not be in the situation that we're in. So, I mean, I think with the Conservatives, and certainly this was Keir Starmer's point in his press conference this week, and I have to say, I think it was, I don't know if you agree, Chris, but I personally thought that, this was Starmer as kind of Mr. Tough Guy. He was really quite robust in his criticism of the Tories on this. And to be fair, ultimately these figures were before Labour came into power, so it is only the Tories that can be blamed for these figures. He was saying that although the Tories talked tough on immigration, that actually in effect they had an open border policy that they never told the electorate about. I mean, do you think that criticism is fair?
I would agree, and I think in relation to Rwanda, what you said, I think the policy it was the only deterrent that this current.
But was it a deterrent? It wasn't a deterrent.
It was a partial deterrent, but what would have been a deterrent would have been a whole scheme of Rwandas effectively signed with different countries. Signing it with one country is just kind of is totally insufficient. There needed to be a comprehensive policy that ultimately dealt with people.
Would you agree?
Processed. Sorry.
Would you agree that it was tokenism? That it was pure tokenism.
Yeah, no, I would agree, but that was better than what we have at the moment, which is nothing, right?
But don't you?
I was never a supporter of it. I was never. It was a tokenism. It was Sunak, and Starmer's doing the same thing. He's saying, right, look at what we're doing. We're going to do this. We're going to stop the boats. We're going to smash the gang. But they don't have a workable policy that will actually comprehensively deal with the problem.
But don't you think that point that I've just borrowed from Tim Farron is right? That actually what we need to do is spend the money on recruiting enough people to deal with this backlog and to stop with the gimmicks. Let's just properly get the numbers in to deal with the backlog of cases. Let's deal with people robustly but humanely. Let's send back those people who aren't supposed to be here, and then let's be properly welcoming to those that absolutely have a right to be here, and that especially those who are seeking asylum from truly dreadful situations. I worry with this debate, Chris, as well as many others, that certainly some in our society have lost the British caring nature, actually, and we've lost our welcoming. You know, we were once a kind of welcoming country, and we I'd allege don't always seem to be that anymore, and I find that quite sad as much as anything else.
I think for the most part we still are. I mean, look at the reception to Ukrainians, to people from Hong Kong. But it's interesting you say that, because a lot of people, you know, today, the Brexit voters, for example, who voted on the basis of immigration and so forth, and the people who object to immigration, a lot of those people would have voted for Tony Blair in 1997. Now, have they changed as people, or has the policy environment, or has the situation changed? And ultimately, what has happened is that what has changed actually, because in the 1990s, immigration wasn't really much of an issue. It was there, but it wasn't the issue that it was today. And I'm afraid that the people in government has to take responsibility for this, and it's ultimately creating this excessive policy where the numbers have got out of control, where they've mismanaged immigration, that has ultimately turned people against immigration. And I would say to someone on your side of the argument is that a good immigration policy requires public consent. It requires the consent of the population. If you take immigration, if you take the numbers too far, in the sense that there's so many people that we take in that the infrastructure can't cope, there's public service problems, there's a less cohesive society, then that lowers the public's perception of immigration as a good in their eyes. So you can't blame like people like Nigel Farage or populists or demagogues.
Well, I mean, I think you can, Chris. I think you can blame them.
You can't, because ultimately, what is responsible is government policy and the mismanagement of it. If government manages it well, then immigration wouldn't be an issue.
Yeah, but Chris, to borrow from Tony Blair, which is not something I do all that often, but I will on this occasion, when he said, I think it was to Michael Howard at the last PMQs before the 2005 election, when Michael Howard was the Tory leader, Blair used this line, which I really quite like, which he said that immigration is an issue which needs to be dealt with but not exploited. And I would argue that the likes of Mr. Farage and others, I'm sure they would say differently, but I would argue that what they seek to do is to exploit immigration as an issue, and to exploit people's fears. And actually, Chris, I'd just put back to you in regards to Brexit, and I think it's a point I've made on this podcast before, but I'll make it again. That if you looked at those places that voted most strongly, most heavily for Brexit, it was quite often the case that in those areas there was very little to actually zero immigration. And so actually it was fear of the unknown rather than fear of the actual, you know, that actually there was very little immigration in those places. In places where there was immigration, I'm not saying everywhere, but in a lot of the places where there was some immigration, and people were used to seeing people and getting used to people, there wasn't necessarily quite the same fear. So actually, it's more fear of the unknown for a lot of people than fear of the actuality of what immigration can mean.
Actually, I was too polite to respond to that point last time, but okay. I will respond to it now. But essentially, you've got to look at the process over time, and I speak as someone who is very familiar with Essex, the Essex County. That's the part of the country that I'm most familiar with, and essentially what has happened over the past sort of 20 or so years, and I'm someone who kind of fought the BNP in the 2000s in one of their hotspots, so I have good knowledge of this. But what has happened in kind of East London to Essex is that you see a lot of people have moved out of East London or out of the London boroughs. This is not just an East London thing, out of the London boroughs into the counties. I'm just saying that's That is one part of the explanation as to why people
Okay.
why you see people in kind of areas which don't have a lot of immigrants still register concern for immigration.
But couldn't it also be, Chris? You may well be right about that, but couldn't it also be, Chris, that we have some elements in our media who every single day of every single week of every single month of every single year add to people's fears and concerns and worries about immigration with the rhetoric that they talk about the subject in? And is not some of our media really quite disgraceful in how it approaches this issue? Again, I would argue trying to stoke people up into a frenzy about this issue, when again I would quote Blair in saying that it's an issue that needs to be dealt with but not exploited.
Well, firstly, I should say that the issue always needs to be dealt with sensitively, and I would always, I would always be not careful, but I would always be respectful in what I say. I would be honest in what my opinions are, which is what I've done, but it should always be respectful. I think you need to produce some examples for me to look at to determine whether I think that's gone over the line. But I say what I said at the start of this, is that ultimately the headlines and the various politicians, they would not gain traction if there wasn't a genuine legitimate concern here. And as I said, in the 1990s, this wasn't an issue, and politicians that spoke about immigration a lot and parties that spoke about immigration a lot didn't get anywhere. It's only become an issue because the numbers are high, and because there are problems with infrastructure and public services, and there is a cohesion element in there as well.
But don't you think that it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy as well? Is that some people might have some slight concerns, and then they read some of the press, and then they become more concerned, and then they read some more of the press, and then they become even more concerned, and ultimately people are ratcheted up to 100 before anything sensible has necessarily been said. I mean, that is what I really worry about on this topic.
It's an issue that we have to talk about, though, isn't it?
Oh,
and so how do we talk about it then? If
I agree,
and if it's a concern in the opinion polls as well, then you can't. As I say, I would not endorse people who would talk about this kind of recklessly, or would be derogatory to certain people and so forth. Right. But how do we talk about it then? That's how can people voice their legitimate concerns without other people shouting them down? I
think we talk about it kind of how we talked about it, which is robustly, but I hope fairly, and both of us have taken care to always remember that these are human beings ultimately. Whatever their reason for being here, right or wrong, these are human beings, and the system should treat them humanely, and they should be spoken about humanely, even by those forces that kind of don't want them to be here, is what I'd argue. This will continue to be a really big hot potato, no doubt, all the way through to the next election and beyond, and it'll be interesting to see both from Labour and the Tories what they do on this. Obviously, Labour can do something about it because they're in government, but in terms of the Tories with their policies as well. So we'll keep a watching brief on that one as well, Chris. Right, let's move on to our final main topic of the day, which is the election, the general election in the Republic of Ireland. So it was their election day yesterday, Friday, as we're recording this. And the results are being counted over the weekend. It takes some time because they have a PR system. Again, a big cheer for their PR system. I wish we had proportional representation here, but that is a Lib Dem hobby horse, as you that is a Lib Dem hobby horse, as you know, Chris. But some interesting results coming out, and obviously, the results have a long way to go. But it appears actually that it's pretty similar to last time, in as much as there's these three main blocks. It does look as if Sinn Féin has won the day just ever so slightly. So they have been the main opposition party over the past number of years. The two parties that have been the two main parties that have been in government, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, so they're both kind of centre to centre right parties, are the two other main blocks. The smaller party that joined them in government over the last number of years, the Green Party, has really taken, and as a Lib Dem, I can know all about this, has really taken the brunt of having been in coalition with much bigger parties and parties that are really quite different to their agenda and their values, etc. It looks as if the Greens could be wiped out or have just one or two TDs, as their representatives are called. Of the smaller parties, it looks like the Social Democrats have done the best. They look to be being returned with more TDs. I should just say that if I was a Republic of Ireland voter, I'd vote for the Social Democrats because they're the most like the Liberal Democrats of the UK. Then there's the Irish Labour Party, which looks as if they'll be back with 3 or 4 TDs, and then there's some even smaller parties and some independents as well. So in terms of forming a government after all of this, and we'll have to wait for the final figures, Chris, but it looks as if so one of two things will happen. So either Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael will unite again to form a government, possibly with the help and support of some independents, or, and I have to say, this second one, it doesn't, to me, look as if there's going to be the numbers for this, but maybe there will be in the end. They'll be turfed out of government, and we'll see a left-wing government in the Republic of Ireland installed, with Sinn Féin as the lead party, and then with the Social Democrats and Labour and the Greens, if there are any, and perhaps some left-wing independents. That to me looks fairly precarious. I have to say, Chris. And the prediction that I'd make, and goodness me, it's always worrying to make predictions because they quite often don't come true. But my view, from what I've seen so far, is that I think it'll be that Sinn Féin will be locked out of government again. And I admit I'm not especially a fan of theirs, so I wouldn't necessarily be too sorry to see that. And it looks as if it may well be Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, and possibly some independents that form the government. I don't know if it was the most interesting of campaigns. There was a bit of I know there was quite a few headlines. I don't know if you saw this, Chris, where the Taoiseach, the Prime Minister there, Simon Harris, had a bit of a strange altercation with a member of the public and it was said that he didn't really handle that particularly well, and I know that
I saw the clip of that, and I mean, yeah, it didn't look good. He didn't really handle that. I don't know if you have as well. What did you make of that?
Yeah, I have. I mean, I always feel, to be honest, for politicians in these situations because, and I think he should have handled it better. But I remember once when Tony Blair was what's the best word, was confronted by someone talking about the NHS and the experience of their family. And of course, people are right to wear their concerns. But I always feel for politicians when, they're kind of confronted by this person, and then they've got all of the media around them, and they know that their every utterance and their every movement and their every word will be scrutinised for whether they dealt with it right or not. But I have to say, this looked pretty bad for Simon Harris, and I do think it might have cost them some support. But I have to say, actually, my prediction had been, after I saw that, it'd probably be Sinn Féin on top, and then Fianna Fáil, and then Fine Gael. But actually, it looks like Fine Gael have I mean, this may change, but it looks as if Fine Gael had probably beaten Fianna Fáil in in the results here. There's an interesting question, Chris, about if Sinn Féin are the largest party again, as I think they were the last time, and are locked out of government again. And I appreciate that's how things work in a PR system. Coalitions are formed and you either have the numbers or you don't. So there's nothing illegitimate about it. But from an Irish voters' perspective, especially obviously for those who voted Sinn Féin, if they find that they're the largest party but are again locked out of government, I guess that could create quite a bit of cynicism, Chris, amongst those voters.
Yeah, it's especially if you look at the issues that were debated. Now, I have to say I don't consider myself an expert on Irish politics, but I have familiarised myself with elements of the campaign, and it's striking to see the similarities in terms of the issues that were discussed in relation to the UK. So you had cost of living, housing, immigration, which we've just discussed, all of those issues. And it does seem to me that a large part of the population do want change, like elsewhere in Europe. They do want a different approach, and they do, and they've been stuck with these parties for seemingly for forever. And again, that's my kind of issue with the PR STV sort of system is that you can vote for change, but ultimately you don't get change. You still end up with a centrist coalition like you do in Germany, and also I do have a problem with regards to I do always think that in whichever system, our system, a different system, I do think that the party who's in first place should form the governments. Now, I wouldn't want Sinn Féin to form the government in Ireland, but that was actually, if you cast back to the coalition, and of course that was done under the coalition government in the UK in 2010, that was obviously undone under first past the post, although it's very rare to have governments like that. One of Nick Clegg's at least stated criteria, even though I think the main criteria was that did the numbers add up, but he did say that one of the reasons why he chose the Conservatives to form a coalition with the Conservatives was that they were the largest party in terms of seats and votes. So is that something, a major concern of yours in terms of going back to PR? In terms of the biggest party not actually ending up in the government.
But it's certainly not unique. I mean, I think back to, I'm quite a fan of New Zealand politics, and I think back to when Jacinda Ardern first became Prime Minister. So she was then the leader of the New Zealand Labour Party. And actually, her party came second in that election. Actually, the New Zealand Conservatives, called the National Party, won that election. But Ardern was able to form a coalition with New Zealand and First, a kind of a populist party, and then have a supply agreement with the Greens, and that meant she had the numbers, and so they became the government. And actually, the Nationals became the biggest opposition party ever in the New Zealand Parliament. So, I mean, if you have a system like that, and obviously I'm in favour of systems like that, but if you have a system like that, it's ultimately, people vote, and then the parties talk to each other about who's going to support who, and who ends up in government. Now, some people find that distasteful. I don't, Chris. I think that actually is just grown-up politics, actually, and yeah.
It's also worth saying, if you have parties in the 20s, you're going to get that kind of thing, whichever system you're going to have. And in terms of the UK, we actually have a relatively similar situation at the moment in terms of polls. The three main parties, Liberal Democrats aren't included here. The three main parties are, they're in the similar kind of ballpark figure. And under the current figures, under current polling, no party would win a majority there. So it's also in terms of what happened in Ireland, but also what seems to be happening in our politics as well, with also the rise of the Green and Reform UK. There seems to be fragmentation across the board, not just in the British Isles, but in Europe as well.
Absolutely, and it's interesting. I'm really interested to see. Excuse me, Chris. I'm really interested to see what happens in Scotland the year after next, because certainly the current polling there, and I think, am I right in saying, I'm sure they do have a proportional system, don't they, for their elections? Do they? Yes, they do. They do. So, yeah. They do. But they do. But yeah, it looks at the moment as if it'll be very difficult for any party or any group of parties form a government after that election, if the polls continue, if the results are as the polls have been showing, because it looks as if whatever party would need the support of the Scottish Conservatives, and I don't think that either the SNP or Labour and the Lib Dems or whatever, or the SNP and the Greens would want the support of the Conservatives. So it may be that in Scotland that there has to be pretty much another election following the first one. So I mean, we'll see about that. But yeah, I mean, but again, what I'd say is that this is grown up. You see, I think that. I know you may say first past the post gives clear-cut results. Well, number one, not necessarily always, because obviously in 2010 we had to have the coalition. But my view is that, and I was talking about this at Compass today, that my view is that ultimately, we should have a parliament that properly reflects and represents the votes that were cast. And at the moment, it doesn't. Now, folks like me have to agree that means that sometimes people that we don't necessarily agree with will be being elected. And if there had been PR at this past UK general election, it's true to say that it would be Nigel Farage who would be asking the 2 questions a week at Prime Minister's Questions, because his party would have likely had more MPs than the Lib Dems. Now, would I have been happy about that situation? No, I wouldn't. But ultimately, if you support PR, you've got to accept that sometimes people will vote for people that you don't personally agree with. But you've got to accept that if it's a fair representative parliament, then that's what it is.
Yeah. I mean, like I say, I still prefer the decisive governments, and I accept your point that it doesn't, first past the post doesn't always produce strong sort of one party governments, but it, for the most part, it does. And I do think it's healthy in our system that we do have these clean breaks. So especially in terms of 1945, 1979, 1997. We'll have to see if 2024 is one of these breaks. It could very well be, given the budget and so forth. As much as I disagree with that, I do think it's healthy to have that change, where in a PR system you do run the risk of having continual centrist governments.
We could see the Lib Dems permanently in government, Chris, and I know that you'd love that so much.
My vision of hell,
Chris would absolutely love to see the Liberal Democrats in perpetuity in ministerial cars. I know he would. In secret. He won't admit it here, but he'd love it. Right, Chris. Actually, we need to be serious now, because I know that you wanted to end the programme by talking about the very serious situation in Syria at the moment. And this is literally breaking news, isn't it, Chris, over the past few hours?
Yeah, this is something that we couldn't fit into the agenda, but this has been going on since midweek. And we may talk about it next week if it continues to be a major story. But there has been a major rebel offensive in Syria against the Assad regime. There's been advances, but we'll have to see how this plays out. And we may discuss this next week if it becomes a major story with major geopolitical implications.
Great, thanks, Chris. And yeah, we'll keep a watching brief on that as well this coming week and over the coming weeks. Folks, we've come to the end of the programme today, of the podcast. Again, we really hope you've enjoyed it. Don't forget all the ways that you can find us, so many ways. So we're obviously on YouTube. We're on all the podcast platforms, wherever you get your podcasts. I think now you can find us, which is fantastic. So don't forget to listen to us on your morning run or your morning jog or your morning lie down. Who knows? Whatever you do on Monday morning. We're also on Substack. You can find our full episodes there as well. We also post clips to Twitter. I still call it Twitter. So we post clips there. And we've started this week, and this has been quite popular, Chris. I say we, that's the Royal Week, because really it's you. We've been putting out some shorts on YouTube as well.
Yeah. So we're basically, thinking of different ways to engage the audience, and it does seem to be that shorts is most popular in comparison to some of the shorter clips that we've been doing over the past couple of weeks. So we will be putting out more shorts because you seem to like them. So we'll be focusing our efforts on that during the course of the week.
Absolutely. Can I just say, though, that the first short that Mr. Newton here put out was him kind of getting the better of me on a topic, I think, and it was really, really popular. So there we are. Maybe that's what we need to do, Chris. We need to put out more clips of you getting the better of me in some of these. in some of these debates. But folks, whatever you're doing this week, look after yourselves. I've no idea what's coming up news-wise really this week in many respects, apart perhaps from the international situation. But whatever it is, we'll be back here next weekend to talk about it. And so from Chris, it's farewell.
Goodbye from me.
And from me, it's goodbye. See you next week.